Well, Dan Lanning clearly wants to build a big-time defensive line. So how do we feel about the defensive line as it kind of looks into 2023? Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day if you're watching on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe wherever you listen to or watch this show. Thank you to everybody out there who has done so already and made this show what it has become and what it could become in the future. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit fanduel.com/lockedon today to get started. So, interesting question came in a while back, and I am a man of my word. I always answer any and all questions that you send me. Send me everything that you've got, anything Oregon related or otherwise. Also, just to be clear, with regards to a picture that I tweeted out of Arizona State's schedule the other day, no, I have not actually accepted the head coaching position at Arizona State University, though apparently when suited and photographed at a certain angle, I bear a slight resemblance to one Kenny Dillingham. I had 3 different people tell me the exact same thing and send me that and say, bro, I thought this was you. It is not, in fact, me. Flattered though I am. Ryan Robertson, and this question came a while back, so again, get into it when the news sort of allows, which it does here. I feel insane here. Well, Ryan, I don't want you to feel insane. Why are people unsatisfied? I know it was an old question about D-line with the freshman lineman. Is Matayo an assumed bust or something? Like I hear people say he won't start, but literally who would start over him? Who has shown the consistent production that people are so certain he won't start? Am I insane? No, Ryan, I do not believe you are insane. But here's the interesting thing about Matayo Uiagalelei. I don't expect him to start immediately right away because for true freshmen to do that is exceedingly rare, especially in the transfer portal era. However, here's what you have to differentiate here. Starting versus playing a lot. Think about it in a basketball sense. You have your starting 5, right? But then when crunch time comes around, the coach tells you who he really wants on the floor. Yeah, you may be the 6th man off the bench, but guess what? Last 6 minutes of a close game, coach is putting you out there. You're not a starter, but you're one of the more important players. It's just one of those things, a matchups thing, a size thing, experience, starting the game a certain way. There are a bevy of reasons why this player starts, but this player actually ends up ending the game. You see it more in basketball, but I think you see it in football as well. And I don't think there is a single player at the edge position that you can confidently say that was on last year's team deserves to have a starting spot. That includes Mace Funa, who might be Oregon's starter on the first snap against Portland State, but he might not play the most snaps. He might just start out there because Lanning and the defensive staff know what they will get from him. Kayvon Thibodeaux, the best defensive end Oregon has ever seen in the history of the program. Maybe the best we will ever see. I mean, let's see what Matayo becomes. I am certainly intrigued. But Kayvon Thibodeaux, his true freshman year, did not start every game. He didn't play every down. He was kind of a one-trick pony. He was a speed rusher around the edge, and he didn't have an array of moves, and he wasn't super refined against the run. And so he was on the field for those first few games kind of as a specialist. But then as practice went on and weeks went on and game reps went on, he started to play more and more. And I think Matayo is the sort of guy, and this is a question that might need to fully examine on the show one day is what sort of player can he be as a true freshman? I think the bigger question is what sort of player can he become once he rounds into his full potential? Because when you watch those early 2019 season games, Thibodeau's on the field here and there. He blocked a punt against Nevada or recovered the fumble. I don't know. He was involved in that, right? He was doing all that sort of stuff. But then by the end of the year, he was taking over games as an edge rusher. Utah in the Pac-12 championship game, and then in the Rose Bowl against Wisconsin as well. Absolutely dominating there. So Matayo may not start or be a guy who sees 50% of the defensive snaps in the first couple of games, but I do have, I think pretty reasonably, the expectation that as the year goes on, he starts to become more and more involved, because that's the sort of player that Oregon seems to have recruited here. I mean, that's why we all got excited. He was someone who, I talked about for many weeks on the show with John Garcia, our recruiting guy here at the Locked On Network, about the potential of getting him. And I was very adamant, and I stand by that particular mindset of, if Oregon doesn't get one of David Hicks or Matayo or Samuel Mpemba, a big 5-star defensive lineman, then it's going to be a little bit of a letdown. But they land Matayo. Okay, that's step one. But step two, develop him into the sort of player that he can become. And it's not as simple as he's got all these physical gifts, he's a plug-and-play guy. Nobody was more physically gifted than Kayvon Thibodeau. The onus is now on the coaching staff to allow him to grow, to allow him to flourish and become the sort of player that he has the potential to be. And we know that not every recruit at really any position always works out the way that we hope. Dante Manning is a great example of that, who's a solid player. He's a contributor. He's not necessarily a starter, but plays a lot. But that's a guy who has not hit his ceiling, and you can attribute that to the kid. You can attribute that to coaching. I tend to think it's a little bit of both. So when you're talking about Matayo, who I don't think is an assumed bust or anything like that, I don't think you're going insane here, my guy. I think that you do need to have the reasonable expectation that he might make a play or two in that Texas Tech game, but I don't expect him to be someone who's dominating that game. I don't expect him to, have 1.5 sacks, 5 pressures, and a batted pass in Lubbock. Maybe he'll show that against Portland State or Hawaii against a lesser opponent, but that does need more time. But when you have a player of Matayo's caliber, the expectation, the hope for us as fans is that he will be able to ascend to becoming a regular contributor more quickly. And the good news is he should have the opportunity to do that, because Mace Funa showed a lot of really good things in the Holiday Bowl, but that was one game. And compared to what he did the rest of the season, outside of a pick 6 against Washington State and a couple decent, plays that were nothing spectacular in running situations for the opposing offense, he really didn't do a lot. So the opportunity for him to step in, get snaps right away, play right away, and make an impact, I think is definitely there. And on that front, I think it's encouraging in general. I want to talk about the rest of the defensive linemen because that was part of the question as well. But you know who else I want to talk about? FanDuel. I want to talk about FanDuel. We are really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they're the number one sports book in America, FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. New customers, join today. Get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/locked on. Look at the AFC NFC Championship games. I like the teams that are currently favored. I like the Bengals, and I like the Eagles. And I changed my position on the Chiefs-Bengals game. The line moved, and that's telling me, and really in general, as I thought about it more, Patrick Mahomes might not be as healthy as the Chiefs would like him to be. Bengals, Eagles, my picks for the week. You can go lock in yours as well. Place your first $5 bet to get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/locked on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. L. So the rest of the freshman defensive linemen, of which there are many, Terrence Green, Amari Washington, Johnny Bowens, Blake Purchase, Jaden Moore, there are a lot of guys there. I think a reason that Ryan is expressing this sentiment that some people may be disappointed, I don't know specifically who he's referring to, but if someone has that mindset, I understand it, because with true freshmen, even guys who are solidly rated recruits, as basically all these guys are, right? A lot of 4 stars, some high 3s, Matayo, of course, the 5-star. Even for guys who have that sort of potential and garner that sort of grade, it's really hard to make an impact right away, even for a guy like Ashton Porter, because finding snaps in 2023, even for a position that has needed to upgrade massively and didn't have as much production as it needed to this last season for Oregon on the defensive line, it can still be hard to find snaps because the number of true freshmen who come in, especially in a position where other guys have got not just more experience, but more time in the weight room and adjusting to the college level in the trenches, it's really hard to come in and make an immediate impact. I mean, this is true on the offensive line as well. I mean, Marcus Harper got a big opportunity this year. He hadn't seen the field in a meaningful way in a while. Josh Connerly seeing snaps as a true freshman, that's pretty abnormal, even if it was in a 14 jumbo package, but it shows you the potential and promise that he has at the tackle position, because there were a lot of other linemen who could have seen the field, who were a little bit more experienced, but Connerly beat them out to be that extra jumbo offensive lineman. Also, let's not forget that he caught a touchdown this year, which was like a fantastic moment against Colorado. Dilly was really in his bag that day. So a lot of these guys who we're talking about, Blake Purchase or Jaden Moore or Johnny Bowens or Ashton Porter, a lot of them are not going, they're not only going to not start in 2023, a good number of them might not play in 2023. We don't know who. We don't know right now. That's why we follow things like practice reports or the spring game or stories from people who cover the team and then react to them here on the show, because it gives us insight as to who's kind of rising up the ranks, who might be, waiting their turn in 2023. I mean, if you just go through Oregon's 2023 commits right now on the defensive line, they are probably going to have more than a few guys who will end up redshirting this year and play in no more than 4 games, see primarily garbage time. But I think that's why I'm still in a little bit of a wait and see. I mean, the Jordan Birch addition's huge. Getting Dorlus back is massive. And if Matayo and some combination of Mace Funa and somebody else, maybe there's another true freshman, or, John has talked a lot here on the show about Ashton Porter, him having a really, really high floor. If those sorts of guys can contribute enough at the other edge position, then I feel pretty good about Oregon's defensive line. But a lot of these guys are, even as 4-star recruits, developmental pieces that won't be ready to make a big impact in 2023. They might see the field every now and then, but we may not always notice. So I think that should fully address your question. And just to recap, Ryan, no, you are not insane. Speaking of roster moves and people moving around and such, I will again remind you what I have heard and what I understand to be true, which is that Oregon needs to be down to 85 scholarships by fall camp when it begins, not spring camp. So they can operate over the limit for a while, but then at some point in time, and the second transfer portal window, as some of you dug up for me, which I greatly appreciate, is May 1st to May 15th. That's when it opens. I will be pretty surprised if more announcements aren't made by then, but guys are likely to enter the portal. That's kind of my theory. I don't know that to be 100% true. But I think hosting a guy like Tysheem Johnson makes you think, man, kind of seems like you could have announcements. They just won't be able to officially go in, transfer schools, get enrolled, get on campus, and start practicing with their new team until that portal window opens May 1st to the 15th. And I believe the expectation is Oregon's spring practice will be pretty much finalized by that point in time, and we'll have a good idea of what the depth chart might be, which players will and won't be able to see the field, and who might be, more well suited or have it be in his or their best interests to pursue an opportunity at another school. Speaking of which, a few guys who have trickled their way into the portal over the last week or so, all at the same position, that being wide receiver. Isaiah Brevard, Isaiah Crocker, Caleb Chapman, all to the portal. I think these are the sorts of additions to the transfer portal you should continue to expect to see. I won't be surprised if between now and May 15th, there's a big name that enters the portal. And by big name, I mean someone who might not be an all-conference caliber player or have just had the most spectacular season, but maybe played a lot. And maybe you wouldn't expect to enter the portal, and is a name that if I were to say, you would have a reaction of like, wait, he's in the portal? No, I liked him. He did this, he did that sort of. I won't be surprised if that takes place. I don't have any insight there. That's a gut reaction, but that's kind of my expectation at this point. But these are the guys who you kind of had a side eye of like, feels like entering the portal's going to be in your best interest here to see the field. Chapman, I don't think he played this year more than maybe a couple snaps. Brevard and Crocker, we'd seen them pretty sparingly over the years. Both look solid when they were out there, but there's just a lot of competition at that particular position group. And though the depth is not necessarily extensive at this point in time at wide receiver, I think there's a lot of talent there. I think there's a lot of high-level talent. You've got Chris Franklin. Yeah, Oregon's newest wide receiver, Chris Franklin. Man, that was good. Troy Franklin. You've got Chris Hudson. You've got Tez Johnson coming in at the slot position, which I think was kind of a message to Crocker and Brevard, who are slot guys themselves. We think this guy is better, and you probably won't be able to see the field, so they're going to try their luck elsewhere. Always wishing them nothing but the best. Caleb Chapman, a little bit of a bigger body. Kyler Casper is still in that room. Trayshawn Holden is probably going to be your outside receiver opposite Troy Franklin going into this year. And then you have Jurion Dickey coming in, who can play inside or out. And you have Ashton Kozart coming in. I think athletically those guys present something that Crockett and Brevard, who again can be solid players, just can't really match, especially Dickey, who is, I think he's got first round talent sort of potential in the NFL draft. Really excited to see if he gets involved heavily in the offense in 2023. And then Kozart, ridiculous speed, 6'3". I'd say he's less likely than Dickey to make an impact in this fall, in this upcoming fall. But I wouldn't say it's impossible. You never know what sort of attrition you could see. Guys go down with injuries, and suddenly you're moving up the depth chart. You never really know on that front. But those are the sorts of transfers that I expect one day will continue to get Oregon down to that 85 scholarship number. Guys who you've seen here and there, you see the potential maybe, but they're not blowing you away, and they're probably not seeing the field for a reason, being that they're just more talented guys in front of them. And I think Chapman, Brevard, and Crocker all kind of fall into that camp. An interesting and long question here from John, and this came via the YouTube comments. You can always ask me a question there or on Twitter at Smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks. Twitter mentions, DMs, either one, wide open, always responding. Love answering your questions. And this is a lengthy one, but I think a really, really interesting thought. Here's what he asks. It's about Nyckoles Harbor, who Oregon appears to be in a solid position for. Nothing is guaranteed. He's definitely the most high-profile recruit that Oregon is going after heading into February's National Signing Day. Spencer, since you mentioned Nyckoles Harbor possibly in the tight end role, I thought I would ask your opinion on him moving to safety to play at Oregon. His high school football stats or measurables are 6'5", 225 pounds, but I know he has to put 15 pounds on after every track season to play football, and he says he doesn't want to do that anymore. If he comes to Oregon as a dual sport athlete trying to get to the 2024 Olympics, then his optimal track weight for the 200 meter is closer to 210 pounds, which is too light for edge or tight end. This is a really interesting question. There's some discussion of him playing wide receiver and using his top end speed to pull safeties into coverage, but I've seen his film pursuing the quarterback, and he's a really great defensive athlete. Wide receiver and tight end are also injury prone positions, which isn't as attractive for a guy wanting to train for the Olympics. Just ask Devin Allen. To me, the stat that screams safety here isn't just his size or speed, but that he's super smart. His two majors of interest are pre-med or engineering, which is something he's apparently considering at Michigan, according to John. Besides quarterback, the position on the field where IQ has the biggest impact is linebackers and safety. He'd be a bit small for a linebacker with Olympic speed, but it would make him a killer safety. With a sky-high IQ, he can be the player primarily positioned to read the offense and call adjustments prior to the snap. Safety blitzes also remain on the table when you need to disrupt. What do you think? I think he would be the first player in history to bounce back and forth between tight end and defensive back. However, I think track is a strong allurement for him to the University of Oregon, which is a great thing for the Ducks. That will help us get him potentially on campus and as an Oregon Duck. But I think this question could very well come up, because if he is having that as a major factor in making his college decision, then he might be looking at his weight and saying, when I first talked about him here on the show, I heard he'd been rumored to be playing some edge, but then it was more like, he wants to play tight end. But if he wants to slim down and be that sort of athlete who plays like a hybrid wide receiver tight end role, the thought of him going to safety, here's who he reminds me of. And I'm going to look up this guy's size right now as I just thought of this. Isaiah Simmons is the guy who I'm thinking of here. Isaiah Simmons is 6'4", 238 pounds. So a little bit heavier than Harbor. But Isaiah Simmons, when he was at Clemson, played safety, played linebacker, stood up and lined up as an edge rusher too. And what makes Harbor so intriguing is he could play a variety of positions. I don't know if he could go to safety, because that would require him, I think. Well, actually, now that I think about it, I don't think it's the most ridiculous idea. I really don't. Because if he's wanting to stay slim, that makes him as nimble as possible. Does he have the experience? Does he have the desire? Both of which would be pretty important to play safety. That's a question that only the coaches and Nyckoles Harbor would be able to answer. But his physical makeup and talents are so unique. He is such an explosive athlete that though I am actually open to this idea, the more that I think about it, I really don't care what position he plays, because someone who's that talented of an athlete physically has the potential to thrive. He could be a Kyle Pitts. He could be an Isaiah Simmons. He could be a more athletic Terrence Ferguson. There are a lot of different ways his career could go, which is why he's listed as an athlete coming out of high school rather than just one position. But whichever position he wants to play is good with me. if he's choosing Oregon, I am not opposed to that safety idea. It's interesting at the very least, and I think Isaiah Simmons is the perfect precedent there. Fascinating question. You guys come up with amazing questions, which is why you should keep sending them in. Appreciate everyone listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.